Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today. The Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or CAPAC, is proud to sponsor today's press conference and to be joined by leaders in the Asian Pacific American and Muslim communities to denounce President Trump's xenophobic, anti-Muslim, and anti-American actions. On Friday, Donald Trump issued an executive order to ban refugees and Muslims from our country. Within a few hours of signing this ban, we began to see the disastrous effects of these policies. Our airports became chaotic centers of grief as refugees, students, and even green card holders were detained and left in limbo. On Saturday, I received my first frantic call about 50 Iranians who were legal green card holders yet were detained by Customs and Border Protection at the Los Angeles airport for hours. And then I began to receive more calls, one from a constituent whose green card holding brother-in-law was detained on his way coming back to Syria, a respected doctor who lived in the United States for years. So I rushed to LAX to advocate for these unjustly detained individuals. And when I got there, I found out that there were many that were detained. A 78-year-old woman, a 7-month-old child, a middle-aged man who'd lived in this country with a green card for 20 years. They were held for hours. They were kept without food. They were blocked from speaking to an attorney despite the court order that was issued by a federal judge. They weren't terrorists. These actions were outrageous. But even worse is that we saw this chaos unfold in airports all across the nation. Contrary to what Donald Trump claims, this Muslim ban does not make our country safer. Instead, it stoked fear, fueled chaos, and torn apart entire families and communities. These actions signal to the rest of the world that America is no longer the symbol of the Statue of Liberty, holding her torch high for the huddled masses of the world. And for the refugees fleeing violence and terror, this policy is a death sentence. We've been resettling refugees in America safely for decades, and Trump's claim that refugees will hurt American communities is simply not true. Welcoming immigrants and refugees and welcoming people of all backgrounds and faiths is the core of who we are as a nation. And this diversity has strengthened, not weakened, our country. But Donald Trump's hateful Muslim and refugee ban seeks to undermine what makes our nation great. And unfortunately, the AAPI community has seen this before. We need only to look at the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, one of the most discriminatory laws ever passed in our nation's history. It was the first law to explicitly ban and name an entire group of people from coming to the U.S. based solely on their race. And then there was the signing of Executive Order 9066, which led to the internment of 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. They were taken like cattle on trains to desolate camps around the nation where guns were pointed in on them, including the elderly, women, and children. They lost everything they had due to prejudice and wartime hysteria that painted Japanese Americans as the enemy. How could this happen? Well, there were not enough voices at the time to speak up against it. But today, this is the case no longer. Today, we have the voices to speak up and to say that we will not allow history to repeat itself. We, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, believe that America is a home for those fleeing religious prosecution, not another home for those perpetuating it. Let us fight to make America the land that we know it is. Let us make sure that America continues to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. I would like to introduce now our wonderful next speaker, the great Congress member from New York, Grace Meng.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank my good friend and the chairwoman of CAPAC, Judy, for putting this press conference together. And of course, I want to thank my colleagues and all the participating organizations who are here today. These are definitely trying times, and it is more important than ever for us to speak out against injustices when we see them. Like all of us here today, I was upset by the flurry of executive orders President Trump signed last week. Particularly shocking was the order from last Friday that temporarily bars the entry of refugees into the U.S. and severely restricts immigration from 7 Muslim-majority countries. And we are told repeatedly that it is not a Muslim ban. But what do I tell my children, the grandchildren of Chinese and Korean immigrants, about what is happening in our country? First, I tell them that it's wrong. It was wrong many years ago, and it is wrong today. In this case, I tell them that we have been here before, and we have fought to overcome it. As Congresswoman Chu mentioned, in 1882, President Arthur signed the Chinese Exclusion Act into law, the first law to prevent a specific ethnic group from immigrating to the U.S. This was after Chinese laborers arrived here to help with historic labor projects, such as building the first transcontinental railroad in the U.S. Had the timing of my own family's immigration story been different, and had my great-great-grandparents been the ones to try to immigrate instead of my parents, they would have been denied entry, and I would not be here standing before you. But I tell my children, America has made mistakes before. History has not always shown our leaders to be right or just, but those who dissent in these crucial and critical moments do so because they can imagine and they know America to be greater and stronger. This is why in 1943 the Chinese Exclusion Act was ultimately repealed. America recognized that the policy was wrong. Later in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act became law, abolishing the national origin quota system. This allowed millions of talented and hardworking new immigrants to contribute to the fabric of our society, making it even stronger. The colorful fabric of our society, made up of all different peoples and cultures, is symbolized by the Statue of Liberty and celebrated around the world. Today we stand and dissent to preserve that fabric. We say that excluding immigrants based on nationality or religion is as wrong today as it was 135 years ago. We say that preventing thoroughly vetted refugees from finding peace and security here is not the compassionate America that we know. We say that these policies don't make us safer, they don't reflect our values. On Monday, we introduced a bill to defund President Trump's unconstitutional executive order. This bill, I believe, truly reflects our values. We are a nation of immigrants. Some have fled war and persecution. Some have come for economic opportunity, but all can contribute to the resilient, vibrant fabric of our society. And thank you all for being here. Next, I'm proud to introduce one of our newest members, Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who has been fighting all her life for the betterment of our country.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Chu, for your leadership, Congresswoman Meng, and all of my colleagues here. My name is Pramila Jayapal. I represent the 7th Congressional District in the state of Washington, and we are proud that in our state, we are one of the top states for refugee resettlement. We have an incredible diversity of immigrants from all over the world, Latinos and Asian Pacific Americans, and we have been at the forefront of fighting for a reform of our immigration system that includes all of us. I, too, am an immigrant myself. I came to this country when I was 16 years old by myself. My parents had about $5,000 in their bank account, and they used it to send me here because they believed that this was the place where I would have the best opportunity and the brightest future. And I can tell you that this is personal and it is collective. It is about our democracy and our ability to fight for the very principles that define who we are. Last week's executive orders on immigration have thrown the country into absolute chaos, from building a $15 billion wall on the southern border that will do absolutely nothing to fix a real and complex issue of a broken immigration system, to the new deportation force of 15,000 new officers who are there specifically to seek out hardworking people that deserve to stay in this country, to the Muslim ban, and we have to call it that, regardless of what the president says, because that is what it is. The executive order that played out this weekend was barbaric and inhumane, and we all have experienced that firsthand. To indefinitely ban Syrian refugees at a time when 5 million refugees are pouring out of Syria, to limit and cut refugee resettlement in half, and then to ban people from certain countries simply because they're Muslim majority countries is un-American and, we believe, unconstitutional. On Saturday, I received a call at about noon, and as many of you know, I've spent the last 15 years of my life fighting for immigration reform and fighting to protect people in this country who are part of what makes this country great. So I got a call at around 1 o'clock, and I raced to the airport, and we had already missed, unfortunately, one gentleman from Somalia who had gotten legal paperwork, had been waiting years to be reunited with his wife and his family, and he was put on a plane and sent back, we think, to Heathrow, but ultimately where he ends up, we still don't know. His family was in tears. They really believed that they were finally going to be reunited. And instead they saw him simply shipped off like a criminal. Later that day, we were able to find out that there were 2 more people, one from Yemen and one from Sudan, who were put on a plane, and the plane was at the gateway ready to take off, ready to be detached from the bridgeway. And thanks to the Port of Seattle officials, to our governor, to Representative Del Bene, who was with me, we were able to stop that plane from taking off by literally reattaching the bridgeway to the plane. And we were able to remove those 2 people from the aircraft and make sure that they were not deported. We had to fight, though, with the Customs and Border Protection, which is funded by dollars that we provide, and we are elected to represent the people of this great country, and instead we were not able to get any information. We literally had to force our way into airports across the country. We had to do this in Seattle to make sure that we could talk to somebody and try to find out more information about exactly what is happening. So we are very grateful to Representative Meng for her bill. Also today we will be releasing a letter that our office helped draft that has over 100 signatures from colleagues in Congress to Secretary Kelly, demanding that A, we rescind this executive order, and B, that we at least get information, basic information about who these people are, make sure that they have access to legal counsel, and make sure that we are continuing to protect the great principles of our democracy. In my state, we have worked very closely with the Japanese American Citizens League, with the Chinese community, with all of the communities who really do understand. And South Asians, as you might know, until very recently, just a few decades, were not allowed to be here either. And we have worked very closely with all of our APA communities to stand up over the years for every single part of our immigration system. The reality is that we are all affected when any one of us is affected, as Dr. King said. And so we're proud of the incredible coalition that we have built. And post 9/11, when I got my start working on immigration issues, we were fighting a Muslim ban of sorts as well. It was called special registration. It was the National Security Exit Entry Registration Program. And working with many of the people that are here now, we were finally able to end that program, which required men from 25 Arab and Muslim countries to be fingerprinted and registered. We also were able to stop the deportations of thousands of people across the country. We filed a nationwide class action lawsuit against the Bush administration at the time and stopped the deportations of 4,000 Somalis, and we've been fighting ever since for reform that brings our 11 million undocumented immigrants out of the shadows. That's because we, as an Asian Pacific American community, understand exactly what it means to be excluded. As my colleagues have said, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese internment of 125,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, tell us that it is critical that we are on the right side of history. And that is what all of us intend to do and fight for, to make sure that we get rid of these executive orders and that we fight every step of the way to protect everyone in this country. Thank you very much. And it's my great honor to introduce one of my heroes, somebody who taught me that, yes, you could be an activist in politics, Representative Barbara Lee from the great state of California.
Thank you very much. And let me thank Congresswoman Chu, our fearless leader, who has brought us all together to champion issues with regard to freedom, equality, and justice, and really to help us keep the American dream alive on so many fronts. So thank you, Judy, and I want to thank my sister colleagues for being here today and for speaking out, yes, and for continuing with your activism as we try to navigate this legislative process here with so many horrific backwards executive orders coming down that are going to hurt so many people, but also really just speak to the un-American nature of what is taking place. So thank you for being part of the resistance. I come from California, the 13th Congressional District, where Oakland is the largest city in my district. I come from a large immigrant community, a large Muslim community, and I just have to say to you today that as an African American, you know, we cannot tolerate what is taking place as it relates to refugees and our immigrants. Many of the refugees and immigrants are from the continent of Africa, for example. We have family members who have been targeted as a result of just their religion over the years, not just now. And so the targeting of Muslim refugees and people of color and immigrants from around the world, we need to fight this and resist it. Now's the time to do this, and CAPAC is needed now more than ever. This weekend, President Trump issued an executive order essentially banning immigrants and refugees from the United States on the basis of religion. Yes, it is a Muslim ban. This action, it shut our gates to some of the most vulnerable people in the world fleeing persecution. The ban flies in the face of our fundamental values as Americans. It's really morally reprehensible, and it will only serve to make the United States less safe. This un-American ban is a direct threat to our national security. It also provides fuel for ISIS propaganda by promoting the false notion, and it's false, that the United States is at war with Islam. This nation is and has been and always will be a nation of immigrants. That is who we are. That's who we are. As the president's divisive ban was implemented, I was really proud to see countless Americans bringing what I call the street heat. And I just want to say, as once again a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, you have seen many African American members of Congress on the front lines joining with our brothers and sisters with CAPAC and with the Hispanic Caucus to tell this administration that enough is enough. Let's stop this right now. Men, women, and children across the country stood up to this president and said with one voice, not on our watch. One thing is certain, there are more of us than there are of them. That is for sure. If we stand together and if we put forth a united front of resistance, we will prevail. I am confident of that. And so I just want to thank you again, Chairwoman Chu, for your leadership. I'm proud to be here with you all today and would like now to bring forward Christopher King, who is the National Director of the, National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. Christopher, where's Christopher? Here you are, Christopher. Thank you very much.
Good morning. The National Council of Asian Pacific Americans is a coalition of more than 30 national Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander organizations. And first and foremost, we want to thank Chair Chu, Representatives Meng, Jayapal, Lee, and the entire Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus for giving our community a voice here in Congress and for giving us this platform to share our views and share our perspectives with all of you. The United States is a country of justice and opportunity and liberty, but there's no question that there have been dark chapters in our nation's history, and that the Asian American community has seen those chapters. We've lived through them. You've heard about them already. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the special registration of nationals from 25 countries in the aftermath of 9/11. Not one of those things did anything to keep our country safer. No single person was convicted of an act of terrorism or espionage in any of these programs that were imposed under the guise of keeping us safe, but really sought to divide us. So the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is proud to stand here and to remind this nation of that chapter in our history. We have that responsibility to remind this nation never again, and we have that privilege to speak on behalf of our ancestors who could not come to this country, to our ancestors who were discriminated against, who were interned and who were profiled, and who may not have the opportunity to tell their own story. We have that opportunity and privilege and responsibility to stand up for them and to make sure this country remembers never again. The Asian American community also has the opportunity to remind this country of its true values, those values of opportunity and justice and equality, the values that led to the Southeast Asian American community, many of them coming over the past decades as refugees, as an incredibly growing part of our Asian American community, enriching the diversity of our, not only the Asian American community, but our entire nation. We have to remind people of what it is that refugees bring to this country, why our country and why indeed the entire world demands that refugees who are fleeing violence and persecution be accepted and given safe haven. And we have to remind this nation of the underlying principles of being a welcoming nation, a nation of immigrants, the nation that my father came to as a blind Korean person who could not have an opportunity for education in Korea, who could not have an opportunity for employment in Korea, and came here to become the first blind person to earn a PhD and to then advise President George W. Bush on disability policy. That's the story of so many people who come to this country looking for promise and opportunity. That's the kind of story that we need to remind this nation of, that we are better than this. And so we as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders stand here to both remind this country of the promise that it holds out to us and to remind them never again. We are so proud to stand here with the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus as it fights in Congress to repeal and defund these executive orders. And I also would note that I'm incredibly proud as the Senate Judiciary Committee today votes on the nomination of Jeff Sessions to be Attorney General, who would implement this policy. The CAPAC, as well as the CBC and CHC, have stood strong to oppose that nomination. We need a government, we need an Attorney General, we need judges, we need a government that will stand up to this president when he seeks any policy that goes beyond the law and beyond the Constitution. This is only the first and probably not the last one of these executive orders we'll see. And I'm so proud to have the leadership of these members of Congress here to speak for us and to fight for us. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Nihad Awad, the National Executive Director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, or CAIR. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. First of all, let me thank Congressman Chu for her leadership and the Congresswoman who I'm always inspired by, and thank you very much for your leadership. My name is Nihad Awad, Nihad Awad, the National Executive Director of CAIR, the Council on American-Islamic Relations. My organization, and American Muslims believe and support all necessary measures to secure our nation and our citizens. However, Donald Trump's executive order is not based on evidence, on national security, or on hard facts. It is based on Islamophobia, on fear-mongering, and anti-Muslim prejudice. He said it on his campaign trail, and he said it before he signed the executive order, and his advisors before and after have been spewing anti-Muslim sentiment. So yes, it is a Muslim ban, and we call it the Muslim Exclusion Order. Unfortunately, it's repeating a shameful and dark chapter in our history. I myself, I am a refugee. I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in a refugee camp. As I said, I myself, I am a refugee. I'm an immigrant. America embraced me, and that's why I succeeded. I believe in the values of this country. I'm inspired by the Constitution that I embraced as my Constitution. The way of life that I'm living here is due to the fact that I was given the opportunity to come and succeed. And that's why I see that this shameful executive order is a blow to our reputation as a nation that has been open and welcoming to all refugees, people who seek protection, people who seek opportunity, people who are fleeing oppression and war and violence. The Syrian refugees in particular, in this case, are the most vetted refugees ever. They go through 2 years of scrutiny. We do not know of any refugee from Syria or any of these 7 countries who have been excluded in this order who committed an act of terrorism in the United States. So this is not based on evidence. It is not based on national security concerns. In my judgment, it is based on anti-Muslim prejudice. President Donald Trump is appealing to his followers who are afraid, who are maybe having these sentiments against refugees, against other immigrants. Instead of leading the nation, uniting us, securing our minds, he is playing with the fear, and he is giving ISIS and other extremist organizations a gift, and he is perpetuating the notion, the false notion in the minds of many extremists in the Muslim world that this is a war on Islam. It is not, but unfortunately Donald Trump, he is still in the campaign mode. He has not switched to the fact that he is now the president of the United States. This is an awesome responsibility, and he's not paying attention to what he does and to the words that he is uttering. That's why we at CAIR have filed a federal lawsuit to challenge the unconstitutionality of this executive order. We are not alone. There are national civil rights organizations who are challenging the legality of this executive order. We have so many courageous voices in Congress. We have millions of Americans who go to the streets protesting these policies. And we have so many hundreds of lawyers who went to the airports. They are not Muslim. They went there because they believe that American values need to be defended. Lastly, I would like to say that what made this great nation is not its military only. It is compassion, it is openness, it is willingness to accommodate and hope and give hope to people and work with them. We believe that we are now the defenders of these values, and we hope that we will succeed in securing America's values and America's reputation at home and abroad. It is my pleasure now to introduce Suman from the Asian American Leading Together, SAALT. Thank you.
Good morning. The totality of President Trump's 3 executive orders on immigration last week sanction the construction of a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, attacks sanctuary cities that are protecting immigrant communities, funnels taxpayer dollars to staff up the Customs and Border Patrol, and now it bans Muslims, rejects refugees, and expands surveillance on Muslim American communities, creating separate and wholly unequal standards of law and justice for millions of Americans. Let us be clear. These executive orders push our nation farther away from core American values of liberty, equality, and freedom. They sow fear in communities of color that already face a rising tide of violence, hostility, and attacks. And finally, these executive orders make us all less safe under the guise of national security. The creation of an entry-exit system, referred to previously as NCAIRs, has a troubling precedent that has devastated South Asian American communities, Muslim communities, as well as immigrant and refugee communities. And as Pramila mentioned, we just dismantled NCAIRs finally at the end of last year because we knew that it was a program that was wholly ineffective and in fact only served to register 83,000 individuals, deport 13,000, and result in not one terrorism-related conviction. President Trump's most recent executive order reopens this wound at a time when our communities are increasingly under attack nationwide. South Asian Americans Leading Together has been documenting the rising tide of violence and xenophobic political rhetoric targeting our communities over the last almost decade. And what we've seen is over 200 incidents in the last year alone, which we know is only the tip of the iceberg, that were animated by anti-Muslim sentiment. 95% of these incidents were animated by anti-Muslim sentiment. And 1 in 5 of the xenophobic political statements that we documented came directly from now President Trump. The anti-Muslim rhetoric that President Trump campaigned upon is now, unfortunately, being borne out in destructive policies that leave our communities increasingly vulnerable to violence. And unfortunately, these executive orders only serve to further divide communities and fan the flames of violence at a time when we know we all must come together as a nation to reject the politics of exclusion. We commend the bold legislators here from the House of Representatives, as well as some of their colleagues in the Senate, who've been fighting to stop funding to enforce the president's refugee ban, to rescind the latest executive orders, to prevent the creation of an immigration-related registry, and to provide access to counsel for those detained at the border and ports of entry, and finally to ensure additional congressional oversight of the president's authority under the Immigration and Nationality Act. We honor the immense action from communities, advocacy organizations, and policymakers at the state and local level who are on the front lines, ensuring that families detained at airports since Friday are released, preparing litigation, and resisting the efforts of President Trump to tear our families and our communities apart. We must unite. The most recent policies will only serve to further divide us as a nation at the very moment when we must come together, as unfortunately the current national message resounds of exclusion and racism. SAALT will continue to partner with our communities across the country to ensure that we have an equal place and equal rights in the U.S. and that our voices ring clear as we fight for equality, protection, and dignity for all. It's my pleasure to introduce Quinn Din, the Executive Director of CAIR, the Southeast Asian Resource and Action Center.
Thank you, Suman, and thank you so much to the leadership of CAPAC for hosting this press conference today. Today, I stand proud as a daughter of refugees from Vietnam whose parents risked their lives so that I could be free. Free from terror, starvation, bombings of our homes, free from political and religious oppression. Because over 40 years ago, our nation welcomed over 1.3 million refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, like my parents, despite the vocal opposition of more than 60% of this nation, from civilians to elected officials who refused to accept responsibility for a war that was created by our own forces and factors. Today, I stand as a proud product of America's legacy as a humanitarian leader, along with the community that now stands 3 million strong, to exercise our responsibility, voice, and power to uphold and protect democracy for all future generations of Americans. As a community of proud refugees, immigrants, Americans, as the descendants of survivors of war, and as inheritors of democracy, we are here to denounce Mr. Trump's executive orders that attack the very best of this American legacy of freedom, compassion, humanitarianism, and democracy. Today, like more than 40 years ago, America faces the same decision as a nation: to protect this legacy as a humane global leader that respects and honors refugee and immigrants, or to attack our country's values of dignity, safe haven, and freedom for all through destructive policies that are based on racism, hate, intolerance, fear, and exclusion. That's why now is the time for our members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to come together to denounce and to reverse these executive orders as anti-freedom, anti-democracy, and anti-America. Those who fought alongside Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Meng soldiers fighting for freedom and democracy, leaders who stood up with the Vietnam War protesters calling for an end to war, leaders who survived torture and war whose life mission is to make sure that this country never repeats the sins and failures of our past. Now's the time that we need our leaders, like CAPAC leaders and the exemplary policies that they have pushed today, to defend against all odds the legacy and rights of a new generation of families to seek refuge in our country. Because more than 40 years ago, America and the world stood up and fought for us, and fought for our country to open its doors. Our community's legacy proves that this country is far greater than the executive orders of President Trump. As Southeast Asian Americans, we stand proud as refugees, as children of refugees, as we call on all leaders to join us to defend and protect the very best of our country's values. Thank you.
Well, this brings us to the end of our press conference. I want to thank our partners and our wonderful Congress members for being here. We stand united against Donald Trump's Muslim ban, and we will continue our efforts to make this the America that we know. Thank you.